G'day and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to respond to the FAA's recent live stream, which I titled Drone Remote ID Rule Live Q&A. And this is an attempt by the FAA to explain the reasons for the remote ID, the way it will be implemented, and what they're trying to achieve. And you've got to admit, this is an important part of any kind of rulemaking process, is to explain what you're doing to the people that will be affected. And so this is their attempt to do it. And I applaud them for that. What I am not so really keen on is the fact that this presentation is full of, well, misrepresentations, disingenuous statements. No, let's call a spade a spade. It's full of lies, bullshit. It's full of bullshit. And I'm gonna pluck these lies out of the stream and just challenge them in this video. And I think we as a community should all be challenging the mistruths, the lies that are being stated here, because this is no way for the FAA to win the hearts and therefore the compliance of a hobby that is being legislated, regulated out of existence. They've done an extremely poor job here. If they'd just been honest with us instead of trying to pull the wool over our eyes, I think they would have garnered a lot more respect amongst those who they are seeking to regulate and control. This has not been a good look from the FAA. But let's get on. Let's talk about what was said and let's just see how bad it really is. So at the 1 minute 40 mark, roughly.
But really all remote ID is like a license plate for your drone. It's something that says like, hey, here I am. And if you need me, you can find me, basically. Just like when you're driving your car, you're letting everyone know that, hey, I'm registered. I'm here. I'm supposed to be here. All is well.
No. First lie. It's not just like a number plate or a license plate on your car. What does a license plate on a car tell you? Well, it tells you basically the registration number of that car. It doesn't tell you who's driving it. It doesn't tell you where it's come from. It doesn't tell you how fast it's going. There's a lot of stuff it doesn't tell you. But remote ID tells you all those things. Remote ID tells you the origin point of the flight, which is also, if it's built in remote ID, then it tells you where the person with the transmitter is standing. And if it's a broadcast module, it tells you where they took off from. It tells you the height of the drone. It tells you a lot of other information that you just don't get from a car license plate. So to call it just a license plate is really, really disingenuous. And the other thing is, didn't the FAA come out and say that you need to register and you need to put your registration number on your drones? It will be like a license plate, so we will know who owns the drone. Well, hang on a minute. Did that not work? What's going on here? They promised us that this registration would be what we needed to identify and the operator of a drone and to stop bad things from happening, or at least to hold those accountable for doing bad things when that happened. But hang on, now they're saying registration was a failure. It didn't work. The little sticker was no good. Now we need to extend it and put a broadcast, a network ID or remote ID on the craft. They're admitting that the first attempt they got it wrong. Well, no, they're not, of course. They're not, because this is a carefully orchestrated strategy. And I think I've tried to get this across to people over the years, is that this starts with a very, very small imposition. Oh, yeah, just register. Just register. It's only $5, only $5, next to nothing. And then the next thing is, well, okay, now you need to put a broadcast remote ID module on your broadcast remote ID module on your drone. It's only a little thing. It won't take much. It'll be built into new drones. And then we get, oh, now all these drones need to be networked, which was in the original NPRM. They said we want all the drones networked so we can track them. Every drone movement can be tracked throughout the country. And that, of course, created a huge outburst of submissions against that NPRM. And then they lied again, which I'll get to in a moment. But suffice to say, any suggestions that the broadcast remote ID is simply a license plate is completely wrong. It is a lie, a total lie.
So what it is, it's a license plate, right? It tells you some basic information about where the drone is. What it's not is tracking. So you may, if you read the NPRM, which is the Notice of Proposed Rule, which we put out originally, you may have read about a network requirement. And I think people were envisioning like this big, like, somebody in a dark room looking at a big radar and seeing every drone in the country, as blips on the screen. It is not that. These things are not networked. It's not the internet of drones. And they're not used to, this information is not used to actively track anyone. It's a very passive system. It's a localized system. It's a local broadcast meant to be received just by people locally. And, it's a way for law enforcement or the FAA to discriminate between compliant and non-compliant drones.
Right, let's just address this. This is getting worse. First of all, it's not tracking. They wanted it to be tracking. And as they said in the NPRM originally, it was a network remote ID where they could sit in a darkened room and track every drone on the planet or every drone in the USA as it moved around. And there were a lot of submissions against that. But the reason they haven't gone ahead with the network component of the remote ID is not because everybody complained and said, no, we don't want it. They can't do it because the technology partners who would have had to provide the infrastructure have said, we can't deliver the technology to provide this level of tracking. I'm sorry, we can't do it. So the FAA has, if you look carefully at their response to the submissions on their NPRM, you search for the phrase at this time, because you notice that they said we're not going to include a network component at this time. What they're saying is as soon as we can, we will. And this is the first thin end of the wedge. With a slightly thicker end, the registration was first. This is a way to get remote ID, broadcast remote ID, get people used to the idea of remote ID. Then when our technology partners can deliver the network component, you'll be hooked up. There will be a man in a dark room tracking every drone that moves around the USA. That is the ultimate plan. And that does nothing for safety. That doesn't stop anything bad happening. But they also say local. She mentions local. Well, what is local? What is local? Well, if we look at what's been proposed for the technology, they're talking about using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Now, some of the latest Bluetooth standards promise a 5-kilometer range for the new Bluetooth, the long-range Bluetooth, 5 kilometers. That is not local in my book. I don't understand how that could be local. And the other thing is they say it's not used for tracking, but it will be used for tracking even before the network component comes in. And I point to things like Open Glider Network and Flight Radar 24. Now, these are systems that have been set up by individual parties or separate parties other than the government, and they have little receivers all over the place, quite often a little Raspberry Pi. My hangar has an Open Glider Network receiver on it, and it picks up transmissions from FLAM-equipped aircraft flying nearby. It then connects to the internet, and so from anywhere in the world, you can see what's flying around the Tokoroa airfield with a FLAM transmitter in it. And if you go on Flight Radar 24, you can track almost every aircraft movement in the world from wherever you happen to be. And that same thing can happen with drones across America once remote ID is installed. All you've got to do is put a little receiver on your house or wherever you are, connect it to the internet, and because of that 5-kilometer range that the long-range Wi-Fi, as long as there's enough overlap, you can pretty much guarantee that people will be able to track your drone. Anyone will be able to track your drone by going online and looking in the area where you are. The FAA themselves may not be tracking you, but people will be tracking you. Your privacy is going out the window. If you want to see where can I go and mug somebody flying a drone in a certain part of the country, well, you go online, there it is, and it'll tell you the exact coordinates of where the pilot is standing with his transmitter, and you and your friends can go along with the length of pipe and steal his gear if you want to. That's the problem with remote ID. It is not what is promised. The downsides are way, way larger than the upsides. And now, just to make it clear about that, the response to the comments on the NPRM regarding network connectivity, we have this.
50-something thousand?
Yeah, I think it was just north of 53,000 comments we received on that rule, which, by the way, is fantastic. That is the level of engagement that we love to see because we really look for your input. And based on those comments, Danielle, there's a few things, or at least one major thing that remote ID is not, and that is a network requirement. Right. If many of you are familiar with the...
And as I said, the reason that they struck out the network requirement at this time is not because lots of people said we don't want it. It's because the technology partners, the organizations, the companies that would have had to have provided that network framework through which all drones could be communicating to a central UTM, they said we can't deliver. We can't deliver this network connectivity. There are huge parts of the country where we do not have the connectivity required to allow you to build this network remote ID. That and that alone is the sole reason that we have broadcast remote ID. And trust me, as I say, look for at this time, and you will see that it is very clear the FAA has an agenda to implement the network component of remote ID as soon as they have the technology to do so. Very disingenuous.
Another thing that remote ID is not, it is not meant for traffic separation. So I know that we do talk about how it's the next incremental step towards complex operations.
There we go. An admission. there is a next incremental step towards this whole thing, and that is using remote ID as a way of managing traffic. And to do that, it must be networked. We must have the network remote ID. Broadcast remote ID will not work. So Danielle is basically admitting that this is just one step towards our goal of network remote ID, with all the things that were in the NPRM that nobody liked and that they struck out only because they didn't have the technology to implement them at this time.
Why are we doing this? Why do we need to have remote ID? What's the benefit, so to speak, for me as a drone pilot?
A couple things for you as a drone pilot. I think the biggest thing is some transparency and accountability.
Whoa, hold up there. Why do I need to be accountable if I'm doing nothing wrong? Really, seriously, accountability implies you're doing something wrong. You need to be held accountable for it. Well, the vast majority of us, 99.9%, probably more than that, of people flying radio-controlled models and drones do not need to be held accountable because they do not do anything wrong. I thought in America we had this presumption of innocence, and you needed to provide proof of guilt. Well, this is an exact reversal of that. This is an assumption that everybody's doing something wrong and they must be held accountable for it by fitting remote ID to their craft.
We already said, that there's a way, there's a lot of concern right now about drone pilots and other people wondering what they're doing. And there's a public perception is very varied right now on drones. When people are not used to seeing them, they're not used to their behavior. They're not sure if they're supposed to be there or what they're doing. So,
yes, that's true. That's very true. But do you really think, FAA, that introducing more rules, regulations, more technical requirements, which assume that drones are going to be doing bad things, need to be held accountable, do you think that's a way to reverse that misconception on the part of the public? Do you think the public are going to go, oh, drones must be safe because the FAA continues to tighten the screws on regulations? The FAA requires them now to fit remote ID. That's because there's no problem. You are exacerbating the very problem that you claim remote ID is going to solve. This is not a solution. It is a worsening of that problem.
So by saying like, hey, here I am, and I'm supposed to be here, it builds in a little. Well,
hang on a minute. Again, how does fitting remote ID to a drone assure a member of the public that the drone is supposed to be there? As I said, is every US citizen or resident going to have that app on their phone, and every time they see a drone, they're going to call it up and say, oh, yes, that's supposed to be there? And besides which, it doesn't guarantee that the drone is supposed to be there. Now, if you've got a bad actor, and because they talk about bad actors later on, if you've got a bad actor who intends to do something bad with the drone, do you think that they are going to use their own drone? I mean, they may steal a drone which has remote ID, and therefore, to all intents and purposes, when you look at your little app on your smartphone, you'll think, oh, it's supposed to be there. It's got remote ID, but they may be about to do something really bad. Very, very unlikely, but they may be about to do something very bad. Remote ID does not guarantee that the operator of the drone is not a bad actor. But she's telling us that's what it does. Lies.
A bit of transparency and accountability into the system. And I think this is really important because this is part of the safety culture. And I think this is how...
Safety culture. This is interesting. We already have a fantastic safety culture in the hobby. How good is our safety culture? Well, the death toll associated with the use of recreational use of multi-rotor drones remains zero. Now, should we aspire to the same safety culture that sees hundreds of people die in manned aviation? Should we aspire to a lower level? I don't think we should, but I think the safety culture of the hobby is way, way better than the safety culture of manned aviation, and the proof is in the numbers. But she's telling us, well, we need a safety culture. We've got a safety culture. I think the FAA should be looking at the culture we have and applying it to manned aviation where the real problems lie.
Drone pilots get credibility and respect from their peers, from their community. And
well, how is fitting remote ID going to give me credibility and respect? No, that's not something that comes from fitting a piece of technology to your drone. It's something that comes from having the right attitude and considering safety to be a prime responsibility, an individual responsibility, not being someone that hides behind the rules and says, I can do this because the rules don't say I can't, even though it may be unsafe. No, this is why we have such a problem. The FAA is so totally out of touch with the real secrets to making this whole thing safer, if it could be safer. Remember, it is still the safest arm of aviation there has ever been or ever will be, and one of the safest forms of human endeavour we've ever engaged in as a species.
From the general public. So it's a very easy way to let people know that, you're not doing anything wrong, basically.
It's not. I just explained that. Having remote ID does not guarantee you're not doing anything wrong. It's a lie. It is a misrepresentation. It's like saying, well, having a license plate on your car guarantees you're not doing something wrong. Yet we have people with license plates speeding, overtaking dangerously, driving to and from bank robberies. They've all got license plates on their cars. It doesn't guarantee a damn thing.
But there's also an element of security and safety in there, where, of course, there's always a bad actor, or there could be a bad actor.
I told you they'd mention bad actors.
And it's a quick way to distance yourself from that person, to say, like, I'm not that guy. I'm over here doing the right thing.
It's not because the existence of remote ID does not in any way give you the ability to judge intent. Absolutely not.
And then it's an easy way for law enforcement to communicate with people if they need be. If there were an emergency situation and there's people flying around, they may be able to let them know that, like, hey, we need to get out of the way. Or
Longbow. What are the odds of that happening? Very, very remote. Absolutely very remote. And it doesn't actually even guarantee that. If you've got a broadcast module, the only thing they'll know is where you took off from. You may not be standing there anymore. You may take off and you may move around. So there's still not the guarantee that it's going to deliver what this lady is promising.
Or something like that. So those are kind of what's in it for you.
These things are of no benefit to the drone operator at all. This has been sold to us as what's in it for you? Why would you want a remote ID? What's it going to deliver to you? It delivers nothing other than additional cost and compliance burden. And I'm afraid there are no benefits to the drone operator at all.
As a pilot. But it also, just normalizes operations. When we
normalizes operations. Well, why aren't our operations normalized already? It's because the FAA and the media has been fear-mongering about drones, telling us, oh, drones are going to bring down aircraft, drones are going to do this, drones are going to do that. FAA, it is not the drone operators you should be preaching to. Go and preach to the public. Go and tell them, well, hey, why don't I see the communications and the videos and the advertising from the FAA saying drones are safe? Drones have never, recreational use of multi-rotor drones have never claimed a single human life in all of history anywhere in the world. And, don't be afraid of drones. They are good. Where is that come? Why are you dealing to us and you're trying to regulate us to be safer when we're already the safest group in the aviation community? And you need to deal with, if you've got a problem you think public perception is wrong, talk to the public. Don't talk to us. We know how safe drones are. You need to talk to the public. You were instrumental in creating this hysteria, this fear of drones. Now you go and deal with it.
See planes flying around in the sky, we don't question whether or not they're supposed to be there or whether they're being operated in compliance with anything. We're used to seeing the paint on it. We see the N numbers. Again,
now this is, it's a lie. We're used to seeing the N numbers. Right. Aircraft flying over a built-up area have to be above a certain altitude. When was the last time you were able to read, without any kind of binoculars or whatever, read the N number on an aircraft that flew over you in a built-up area? Probably never, because they're too high. You cannot see the N number from that distance. So it's like the little sticker you have to put on your drone. You can't see it from a regular operating distance. You can't see the N number on a manned aircraft from a regular operating distance. So why, if we're going to have a broadcast remote ID on every drone and model aircraft flown even in Class G airspace, why doesn't manned aviation have to have broadcast remote ID when operating in Class G airspace? ADS-B is required in a lot of areas where they have controlled airspace, but outside of controlled airspace in Class G airspace, we're going to have the ridiculous situation where your 250-gram toy will have to broadcast its ID to the world, but a Cessna 172 flying overhead doesn't have to do that. Why? And they say it's about safety and security. Oh, these drones could carry, they could carry explosives. Well, yes, you could carry a few ounces of explosives on a drone, but a manned aircraft can carry hundreds of pounds of explosives, and they have been used for that. There has been no recorded instance in the Western world that I'm aware of where a recreational multi-rotor drone has been used to take a human life deliberately. But manned aircraft have. It's happened a number of times. Yet we're not saying, well, manned aircraft must have a broadcast ID on it in Class G airspace, but your toy drone must. Yeah, this is the justifications given here are erroneous and false.
There's just a sense of comfort that the system is working the way it's supposed to be. And I think this is a step in that direction. It's a step in
feel good. Let's get the feel good. Let's get the emotions going. It's not about emotions. It's about safety. Don't waste your time trying to appeal to our emotions. We're not here to be cajoled and given a sense of security. No, not working.
and getting everybody on board doing the same thing. And with that, we get, the opportunity for more advanced operations. So we already said, this is the next step towards complex operations, such as some operations over people, maybe beyond visual line of sight, maybe the UTM, the unmanned traffic system.
There we go again. That's the unmanned traffic system. That's what they're aiming at. That's the goal. That's the long term. That's the long term goal. As in the NPRM, the original NPRM. Now, the intent of the FAA has not changed. They put the NPRM out for discussion. They got a lot of over 50,000 submissions, and they had to change some things because they just technically couldn't implement some of the proposals they had made. But their intent has not been changed at all by those submissions. Their intent is still to have a network remote ID where before you can take off, you've got to get permission from a central UTM. And that means pay to fly. Pay to fly. That's the bottom line. Pay to fly. There are a lot of very large corporations with huge financial interests in setting up a nationwide UTM where they can earn a clip on the ticket every time someone flies a drone. Money in the bank for them. That's the end goal. And to not even acknowledge that it's all driven by money is sad. They're claiming safety and security. I think we've proven conclusively that remote ID does nothing to contribute to the safety of a flight. And because bad actors can fit remote ID to their drones, it doesn't contribute to security either. This is so much fallacy, so much fakery, so much disingenuous statements from the FAA. And yet they're trying to convince us that you can trust us, you should do what we say, you should have respect for us. No, people that lie to my face get no respect from me.
Yeah, and that last point I think is really, really important. I mean, we definitely talked about the safety elements and the security elements and the public acceptance. This will help in those venues, but it's that last talking point you had, which is this is the next step. And if you're sort of wondering,
there we go. At least they're being honest now and admitting this is just one step on the road towards that unified traffic management system where everyone has to pay to play. And really that just further relegates the hobby out of the airspace because we can't afford to pay the prices that commercial operators will be paying to use that 0 to 400 foot airspace. And if you can't pay, you can't play. Used to be I remember my grandfather telling me, one day they'll tax the very air we breathe. Well, this is the road to that level of taxation. And they're only achieving this is because we let them. The hobby as a group simply sat around and watched the FAA and other regulators dismantle what we had. Take away the freedoms, take away the rights, take away the liberties, and replace them with pay to fly. So I despair when I see people just sitting by and watching this happen.
As remote ID comes along, you're going to start to see more, and Danielle, I'm going to steal your word on this, more normalization of drone operations. And
this is really kind of sad, kind of tragic. I did a video a while ago showing that when I was young, it was normal for people to fly model aircraft in parks. Control line models in the middle of a park. People did it all the time. I flew in my local school grounds. I flew free flight models at the local park. I flew control line at the local park. It was normalized. It was a normal thing. The reason it's not normal now is because the FAA has made it not normal. They have warned people of the dangers of drones and we should all be aware and they're going to bring down airliners. They are responsible for the lack of normalization. So they've taken it away with all their hype and fear mongering, and now they want to give it back to us in return for us giving them our freedoms, our liberties, and paying money, effectively paying money through network remote ID when it arrives, but saying, well, basically, you can only fly in these areas if you do what we say and fit these network or remote ID devices to your models or fly remote ID equipped models. Why? Why did they do that? It's all about control and power, I guess.
And Danielle, yeah. I love your little idea or your description of when we look up and we see an airplane, we don't panic thinking that shouldn't be there. Right. That's where we want to work towards with drones and gaining that public acceptance.
That's the way it used to be with model aircraft and drones. No one panicked. No one was afraid. People were curious. They were interested until you guys told them that these things could be about to bring down airliners and they were a major threat to the national airspace. Disingenuous.
So
yeah, and hopefully it lowers the temperature of kind of the uncertainty or fear that some people have about drones, including law enforcement. Sometimes they're not sure, like, what's going on. There's a lot of, rules. And sometimes, like, we're here talking to the drone pilots all the time, trying to educate them. Certainly the general public and not every law enforcement officer knows all of the rules. So this is just.
Well, this is a bit sad, isn't it? They're acknowledging that the people who are supposed to be enforcing the law don't know the damn rules. So surely it's them you should be educating, not us. I think most of the people in the hobby know the rules. We know the rules pretty damn well. And if we are to believe you, FAA, everybody that flies a drone now knows the rules because of the trust exam, the online trust exam. So we know the rules, but the policemen don't know the rules. Is that a situation you're happy to allow to exist? I, as a regulator, I don't think you should be accepting that as openly and as nonchalantly as you are in this stream.
Just a quick and easy way to be like, oh, okay, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like, let's go move on to something else.
How will they know? They don't know the rules. How can they tell if they're compliant with the rules if they don't know the rules? All they're going to know is, oh, it's got remote ID fitted. They won't know who the pilot is because it's only the remote ID's only related to the actual owner of the drone, and they've lent it to a friend. No guarantee they're going to have the use. Like a car. It's a license plate. Doesn't give you a lot of information, but it does give you much more than a license plate. It's an invasion of privacy, but it's not a way of preventing bad things from happening.
Yeah, or perhaps easily identify somebody that's not doing something they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
How are you going to do that? If someone is using a drone for nefarious purposes and they're flying below 400 feet and they're flying in an area where they're supposed to be allowed to fly drones and they've got remote ID fitted, how's it going to tell you that they're doing something bad? It's not.
So I should have mentioned it in what remote ID is not part of our conversation. So it's not broadcasting your personal identification. Just to be very clear, this is not saying, hey, there's Danielle. She lives over there and she's flying. It's just.
But what it is broadcasting is, hey, there's somebody with a drone and they're standing over there. And if you want a drone, just go over and knock them over, take the stuff off them. It is broadcasting your position, and your position is actually a part of your privacy. Where you are at any given time is a matter for you. That information you should have control over. We don't have personal trackers on our bodies to tell the powers that be where we go every moment of every day. As long as you're flying a drone, that's exactly what you will have with this broadcast ID. Anyone will be able to see where you are, where you're standing. If you've got the standard broadcast ID, anyone will be able to see where you are standing at this moment in time. And as we know, the world's not perfect. Speaking of bad actors, there are more bad actors who would want to assault you and steal your drone, because when you're flying a drone, you're pretty defenseless. There are more bad actors who want to do that than want to use a drone for nefarious purposes.
Putting out basic information about the drone. So in order for those signals to be used by law enforcement, if need be, or by the FAA, if need be, to find an individual connected with a drone, we have it's linked with registration. So in effect, there is personal data, but it's only available to law enforcement officers because it's just indirected through a registration number. But hey, that registration number is already on the craft with a little sticker. So remote ID simply expands that range. Now, I've mentioned several times that the remote ID system has a flaw because it broadcasts your position, or at least where you took off from if you're using a broadcast module, and that information is publicly available so that people will know where you're standing with your controller flying your drone. And as we know, we have the problem with Karens who want to come over and accost you and tell you off and tell you that you're spying on their children 3 miles away through the bedroom window with your high-powered drone camera. But that's not the real problem. Karens are easy to deal with. The real problem is the criminal intent, the people who want to mug you and take your stuff. Now, you're never more defenseless than if you're standing there, for example, flying FPV or something, or even if you're there with your camera, your phone on your transmitter, and you're concentrating on flying, you are very susceptible to people creeping up on you and taking your stuff. And there's not a lot you can do about it. So it's really quite handy if that information is not publicly available. So it's good to see them addressing this, but let's see how well they handle that question of the vulnerability that remote ID exposes the drone operator to because their position is disclosed. Let's see how they handle that.
Next question. I'm going to take this next question, and I'm going to take it because if I mess it up, Danielle, you can help me redo my resume as I'll be looking for some new work here. But this question comes in many, many different forms, and it's probably a question that people may have been shouting at their computer for the last 25 minutes. but we get a lot of comments, a lot of questions around this topic, which is the premise is remote ID is dangerous for drone pilots. And the public is going to have now access to where a drone operator is standing, or at least where the control station is, or where the drone took off from. And they'll be able to find the drone operator and harass them. And this isn't to discount the fact that we know this has happened, not with remote ID, but we know drone operators have been harassed. We get the information just as well as you folks do in the community. So let me try to answer.
So they're acknowledging this is a definite problem. Even without remote ID, drone operators are being approached by members of the public and harassed, the Karen factor. And to be honest, people have had their gear stolen. They've been assaulted and robbed while they're flying drones. So they've acknowledged that this is a problem. Let's see their approach to dealing with this and mitigating that risk with the effects of remote ID.
To this question. First of all, Danielle touched a little bit. It does not broadcast any personal information.
That's irrelevant. It's not about personal information. It's about your position. It's about where you're standing. So that's a red herring.
The serial number that is broadcast, or perhaps a session ID at some point in the future, is tied to your...
Session IDs are remoted to a network remote ID. That's worth remembering. As I said, this is just a one tile on the path to full network remote ID.
Registration, and that registration is not public information. That's not something I can just look up on my computer and find out who you are. It's meant for law enforcement and FAA personnel only. So I just want to emphasize that again. The next piece of it is we want to try to get in front of being harassed, or in front of, in some cases, terrible instances where people have been assaulted.
Right. So he's talking about prevention. That's very important. He's talking prevention, but what are they doing?
That's after the fact. And I'll say this, if you've been harassed or you've been assaulted, which was really unfortunate and terrible, contact law enforcement. I mean, dial 911, get law enforcement involved right away. No matter what the FAA has, or is going to be doing, get a hold of law enforcement.
Now, this is really the whole remote ID thing. This speaks to what remote ID is. Now, there's two ways of dealing with bad situations. You can build a fence at the top of the cliff, or you can put an ambulance at the bottom. Now, I think most people would agree it's far better to have a fence at the top of a cliff to stop bad things from happening than to have an ambulance at the bottom to help try and fix the injuries and the damage and the danger that falling off a cliff represents. The FAA's response with remote ID and here is to, well, we'll just put an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, and then it doesn't matter that there's a cliff there with no fence at the top. That is not correct. That is... Prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say. And the FAA seems fixated on dealing with the problem after it's occurred. Remote ID will enable us to track down the people who have done bad things. Won't stop them doing bad things, but we'll be able to track them down. We don't care about the disaster and the crisis that unravels because we're not stopping them from doing them. As long as we can punish them afterwards, that's fine. It's the same. We don't care if people get assaulted or robbed, as long as you call the police afterwards. How are you going to do that? They just stole your phone. No, but let's listen on.
That's something that you need help with, and we hope that law enforcement gets a response time quick enough and can help you out. But what we're going to try to do is get in front of that. The goal is that you're not harassed. The goal is that you're obviously not assaulted or threatened in any way. So
it's a laudable goal. That's a worthy goal. But how are you going to achieve this?
How do we get in front of that? Remote ID is absolutely going to broadcast your control station location. It's absolutely going to broadcast where the drone took off from. So what do we need to do to make sure that the public is aware of what's happening? And going back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, Danielle, accepting of drones in their neighborhood. What we see most of the time is people's reaction to drone based off of bad information, social media.
And where has much of this bad information come from? It wouldn't be from the FAA, who have been repeatedly warning that drones are going to bring down airliners. Drones pose a threat to the national airspace. Drones are bad. Drones are evil. Would it? You created this situation. You were instrumental in creating this situation, and now you're telling us you're going to fix it. Why did you bother creating it in the first place? And if you need to be, instead of telling us what you're going to do, you need to be doing it. You should have, at this time, announced you were rolling out a public education campaign where we're going to educate the public as to the fact that drones are not a high-risk thing. Drones should be a normal part of everyday life. Drones. You're not doing that. You're not doing that at all. You're just telling us we're going to fix the problem. Remote ID will fix the problem. It won't. It won't fix the problem. There will still be Karens that come along and berate you because they think you're spying through the bedroom window of their house 3 miles away with your high-powered zoom camera on your drone. You're not doing anything to address the root cause of this problem, which is misinformation. Remote ID will not fix that. Remote ID will not normalize drone operations. You should be talking to the media and explaining the situation to them, not to us.
News that's telling them, oh, drones are out there, they're not doing good, they're spying on you. And so the reaction is generally anti-drone in a lot of these cases, certainly in the cases where people have been harassed or assaulted.
So how are you going to explain to people that because this drone has remote ID, it won't be spying through your bedroom window? Because this drone has remote ID, it won't be doing anything bad, because we've already seen in this video, remote ID does not stop bad actors from doing bad things. It never will. It does not stop stupid people from doing stupid things. It is not a preventative measure. It is a measure by which you can track down people who have done bad things. That doesn't stop. You have an ambulance at the foot of this cliff. You're not building fences. There's no way you can build that fence because you have the wrong strategy.
How do we stop that from happening? Education outreach. That's step number one. We need to have the public understand drones are here for good. And that drone that's flying in the park is not trying to spy on you.
This was the situation years ago before the FAA started fear-mongering, and the media grabbed onto that and exaggerated the situation even further. You caused this situation. So what is do you have a program? You're announcing a program now where the FAA is going to spend millions of dollars educating the public through the media as to the fact that drones should be considered normal?
Everybody's flying these drones. Not everybody, almost everyone is flying these drones for good reasons. They love flying them. They're doing it for work. And we want the public to really understand that. So how do we get that information to the public? We utilize our drone pros. So our FAA safety team has volunteer members, almost at least one, if not more, in every single state that are involved with their local communities.
One person in every state is going to change the tide of public opinion in respect to drones, because they're going to say, you're safe now. These drones have remote ID. Do you think that will work? I don't know. Let's listen on.
To help educate their local communities on what drones are doing, why they're good, and how they can be accepted, and that you don't need to worry. We also have an entire program in the FAA dedicated to coordinating with law enforcement. We call it our Law Enforcement Assistance Program, where we work directly with law enforcement agencies to provide them with the information they need to know so that...
Well, hang on a minute. We just got told that law enforcement officers don't know the rules. So this program seems to have been wholly inefficient to date, because Danielle admitted that, and I think Kevin admitted, that police officers don't always know the rules. But you've got an entire team working on this. What are they doing? Eating biscuits and drinking coffee all day?
They can accept and be familiar and comfortable with drones operating. And it's that broad-based education and outreach effort that we want to coordinate over the next, remember, we have a couple of years to go still, over the next couple of years, that we can get the community to be more accepting of drones. We want to highlight these wonderful things that drones are doing so people understand the benefit of them.
But drones have been doing these wonderful things ever since they came out. They've been providing people with a fantastic leisure opportunity. They've been providing people with a way to get amazing pictures of the world. They've been providing the ability to search for lost people, to monitor high-risk environments. These things have always been there. So nothing has changed. Nothing has changed in terms of how beneficial drones are to society. So what will you be doing? Nothing's changed. You're going to be changing your tune. Instead of telling the world that drones are dangerous, drones are evil, drones will bring down airliners, you're suddenly going to reverse on that. So will you admit that you were wrong in the first place? Because that would be going a long way towards establishing credibility with the community that you seek to regulate. I don't see that happening with the FAA. They never admit when they're wrong, like when they steal my stuff. They'll never acknowledge, never apologize. And that does not create trust.
We feel that that is going to be the best approach to try to limit. Again, we want to be in front of that harassment, not on the other side.
Remote ID will not do that. Remote ID does not change a damn thing. It will not change public opinion. And it will not. These justifications for remote ID are specious, that they're untrue. It's, again, I said when I started this video, it's all about lies. This is a lie. Remote ID will not achieve this in the least. And if you disagree with me, go to the comments on this video now and tell me why I'm wrong, because, hey, unlike the FAA, I'm happy to admit I'm not always right. And if I'm wrong, I will admit it and apologize. So go and tell me why I'm wrong in the comments if that's what you believe.
If it does get to the other side, the FAA will have to address that accordingly, perhaps with some different rule changes toward the future. But ideally, we don't.
Rule changes. That's their answer to everything. Let's just change the rules. People aren't following the rules, so we'll just change them or make new ones or make harsher punishments. It doesn't work. The problem element do not actually follow the rules. If rules and laws were effective, there'd be no speeding, there'd be no murder, there'd be no rape, there'd be nothing like that. Rules are there, they only affect law-abiding people, and law-abiding people are not the problem. If someone's going to use their phone to find out where you're standing with your expensive drone controller, flying your expensive drone with your expensive smartphone, and come along and mug you, no law on the planet is going to change that behavior. No rule by the FAA is going to change that. You guys really need to go back to thing and decide, is it even sensible? Is it even sensible for that information to be publicly available? Now, I would have said that if you're going to make that information available through remote ID, it should be encrypted, and only authorized law enforcement officers should have the ability to decrypt that and see where you're standing. But no, it's going to be publicly accessible to everyone, all the Karens, all the muggers, everyone that needs or wants to know where you're standing so they can come and deal to you will know, because the FAA is too damn stupid to make an encrypted substream that restricts that information to only authorized personnel. Are they stupid? Isn't that what you would have done? Draw your own conclusions.
I want you to be harassed at all. So we're working towards that goal and trying.
That's right. The FAA reserves the right to harass. No one else is allowed to.
To educate and communicate first. So I understand, and not just myself, everyone at the FAA hears you loud and clear about the concerns that you folks have with regarding location identification and people being able to find you. But we're working on the front end of that and trying to educate first. And then if that doesn't work, we'll explore other means.
But hang on, you haven't even given us any viable educational program. You've got one person in each state who's going to educate the public and change their perception after a decade of misinformation and fear-mongering. One person in each state in the next 2 years is going to change the whole thing so that when remote ID is implemented, everybody will love drones and drone operators. Are you that out of touch with reality, FAA? I'm sorry, this, again, it's either you're lying to us or you're so stupid you don't know you're lying to us. It's not viable. I'm sorry. I despair at these people, honestly.
Once remote ID components, whether that be a broadcast module or that's a manufactured drone we're calling standard remote ID, once those are starting to be manufactured, somebody could go back under the operations over people rule and comply with remote ID, comply with Part 89, and conduct sustained flights over open air assemblies of people.
Now this, again, we're being sold on this as a safety and security thing, as remote ID improves safety. How the hell does fitting a transmitter, a remote ID, a broadcast remote ID unit, how the hell does that make it safer to fly over people? It does not change the risk profile of your drone at all. In fact, it probably increases the risk slightly because the weight is higher, there's more load on the motors, more load on the props, there's extra payload to carry. It beggars belief that obviously the FAA does not understand how to calculate risk. If they think that fitting a broadcast remote ID transmitter reduces the risks of flying over people, they have no clues. They are not qualified to do the job they're doing. But that's exactly what is being presented here in this stream. Unbelievable. Okay, now there's a very interesting question here, because in New Zealand we have something called a shielded operation, and it's a common sense thing, unusual in regulation, but New Zealand's not too bad in some regards. Basically, it says if you are flying your drone or your model aircraft in an area where there is almost certainly not going to be any manned aircraft, for example, below the tree line in the local park, so that you are lower than the tallest object within 100 meters, then certain freedoms are allowed. You can do it closer to an airport. You can do it right up to the boundary of an airport, for example. There's no airport restrictions, exclusion zones if you're flying in what we call a shielded operation. So it would seem to me to make sense that remote ID would not be needed in such an operation in America either. But this is the question that's asked, and let's see how they handle this one.
The question is, can I fly a non-remote ID drone below the tree line on my own property?
Was that for me? Um,
Yes.
I'm glad you asked this question in that way, because I think this is something that really speaks to me, because there's a certain amount of common sense, right? That you're like, well, I don't know, I'm in my backyard, I'm below the tree line, why do I have to participate? The fact is that the National Airspace System is a public resource, and it includes all the airspace around your house and your yard. And in order to make it equitable and accessible to the most amount of people, we don't have little carve-outs based on, you know, somebody's yard or somebody.
Well, that's not strictly true. We do have a lot of carve-outs. That's why we have different classifications of airspace. That's why we have regulations that control how low manned aircraft can fly in certain areas. That's why we have no-fly zones. We have a lot of carve-outs. We have a lot of exceptions to this national airspace thing. And also, really, is the air around the airspace around your house, is that really national airspace? I think there was a court case some years ago which sort of proved in the courts that the airspace isn't national if it's an area that you would normally use. So if you've got a flagpole, well, the area around that flagpole is your airspace, because no one else could reasonably use that airspace. And this is the basis of shielded operations. So to say that to say what this woman's saying, she used the word common sense. There's no common sense at all to what she's saying, because, again, we've been lied to. There are carve-outs. There are carve-outs for these things. There's military. There's when the president visits a particular area, no one's allowed to fly there. It's a national airspace. It's a public resource, but people are excluded. There is a no-fly, temporary no-fly zone, or restricted flight zones. So, again, we're not being told the truth. We're being lied to by the FAA because they want to engender our trust and respect. Not working, folks. Let's listen on.
House or personal property. The whole system is one big system, and therefore the rules apply to the entire airspace. So yes, even if you're flying in your backyard, you still have to comply with federal aviation regulations. So if you're flying recreationally, you'd follow 44809, which are the exception for recreational flyers. If you're flying for your business, you're taking pictures of your house to market your...
Now, this is the perfect example of a bureaucracy at work. When challenged, when asked why, the answer is reasons. We don't have to give reasons, just reasons, because we say so. That's it, basically. And no, it's not. Doesn't make any sense. She admitted it really doesn't make any sense, but reasons. And that is the perfect example of why bureaucracies are terrible, because there's no need for these people to explain why this is a really stupid idea. They just have to say, we're the FAA, that's what we say, reasons.
Real estate, you'd fly under Part 107. And no matter why you're flying, remote ID is now required for all drones.
Because reasons.
There is a minor exception there. I don't want to misspeak and get called out on the social media here. Because it's tied to registration, there is a small carve out, just as there is for registration. If you're flying strictly for recreational purposes, strictly recreational, and your drone weighs less than 0.55 pounds, you need not register or comply with remote ID.
Because bad actors will never use small drones, right? Because a drone that weighs 249 grams is much safer than a drone that weighs 250 grams. Reasons. Bureaucracy.
But I think that question also, talking about flying below the tree lines, we get that a lot. It touches on a lot of people's question of, well, what would an airplane be doing below the tree level in my backyard? And it's important to point out that hopefully you never see an airplane below the tree level in your own backyard. But really, that's not the overriding concern we have. And that's not why these airspace restrictions exist and the requirements exist to fly in the National Airspace System. It's because what if your drone does something you weren't planning on it to do? Fly away. Well,
this is interesting, because what precautions do we take to stop vehicles from unexpected acceleration? We've seen people killed when their cars have unexpectedly accelerated because of a fault in the system. You can do these long bow what ifs, but it's like, what if a meteor falls from the sky and destroys mankind? You look at the historical data. We need to look at the historical data. If you're going to draw this what ifs and this could always happen, let's look back and see how often this has happened. When was the last time that a drone flew away and either caused a death or significant property damage? I have not seen one record, one report of any kind of drone flying away and causing a death, a major injury, or significant property damage. We've been flying these things for over a decade. That's 10 years all around the world. And there have been billions of flights of drones, not one death associated with the recreational use of multi-rotor drones, not one significant piece of property damage directly related to the recreational use of recreational multi-rotor drones. So why draw this long bow? This is what regulators do and what bureaucrats do when they have no answer. They make shit up and they try and present it as, well, this could happen. What if? What if is the weakest argument you can possibly have, and he has just used it.
Lost link, lost communication. All of a sudden, your drone is no longer below the treetops. It's going somewhere you don't want it to go.
And the reality is that I know all my drones, if I lose the radio link, it falls on the ground. It's called fail-safe. Now, do the FAA, have they not heard of fail-safe? In the case of something like a DJI drone, the fail-safe, the default fail-safe behavior is return to home and land. And if you've taken off under the trees in your backyard, well, that's where you're going to land. These people have no clue. They have no reality. They don't engage in that which they are seeking to regulate. They only have third-person knowledge, and that causes bad regulation and a lack of appreciation for the facts and the reality of the situation, a disproportionate understanding of, or inadequate understanding of the risk. And I mean, where is the risk assessment? Come on, this should all be based on a scientific, independently peer-reviewed risk assessment, but there is not one. And I've said this many times before. They do not produce a risk assessment because it would dismantle their case for this kind of regulation. It would prove that, well, the risk isn't really there. And in fact, it's interesting that the FAA themselves say we want to educate to show people that drones can be normalized. What you're saying is that, well, we want people to know that they're not dangerous, that there's not a lot of risk associated with them, which is exactly the opposite of what you've been telling us for years, but you won't admit, we got it wrong, we're sorry. No, never apologize, never admit. That's the FAA's mantra. And when stuck with a really hard question, pluck straws out of your ass and say, what if? It's not good enough.
We need to take a look at all the risks involved with any aircraft operating the airspace system. So
But you haven't done a risk assessment. We need to take a look. When you take a look at the risks, it's called doing a risk assessment. And I have many people have asked for a copy of the risk assessment to back up the current rules governing the use of drones and model aircraft in the national airspace. There is not one. So you haven't taken a look at the risks. So don't lie to us yet again. How many lies? I should have put a counter in this video, counting the lies that have been rolled out to justify the unreasonable intrusion into privacy and the withdrawal of freedoms and rights that have been in place for years and never caused a single problem.
The tree lines isn't really because we think airplanes are going to be flying below the tree line in your backyard. It's so that we can protect the airspace around that particular area. So if something does go wrong, we have the ability to react, or air pilots have the ability to react accordingly.
Whoa, hold up there, hold up just a minute. I'm doing the edit on this video and I just noticed what this gentleman said, so I have to respond to it. And this is possibly the worst lie I have seen in the entire video stream. So let's just listen to what he said again. He said, so that we can protect the airspace around that particular area, and so if something does go wrong, we have the ability to react, or pilots have the ability to react accordingly. Now that is the justification for requiring remote ID when you're flying your own drone in your own backyard. But this seems to fly in the face of what we've been told previously, because we were told that remote ID will provide no tracking. Broadcast remote ID provides no tracking. So if your drone decides to head skyward beyond your control, how will anybody aside from you know that's happening? No one's tracking that drone. That broadcast remote ID isn't tracked. So the powers that be won't know it's happened. And they say it'll allow pilots to react accordingly. How will the pilots know that your drone has reached for the heavens? Because, as we'll see later on in this video, the pilots will not have equipment in their aircraft that detects remote ID signals. They've deliberately said we're not going to do that because it would be too much of a workload on the pilot, reducing safety. So it's a complete lie. It's utter bullshit. This guy has plucked stuff out of his ass to try and justify something that's totally unjustifiable. He's been countered or hit with a question which common sense would dictate, hey, this seems like a reasonable thing. You shouldn't have to have remote ID when you're flying under the trees in your own backyard. And the only way to respond is to come up with some cockamamie bullshit story which doesn't pass scrutiny. Remember that. This is terrible. This is the worst part of the video. I'll return you now to the original video.
Why aren't we equipping aircraft or requiring aircraft to be equipped with equipment that can pick up this remote ID broadcast? And I think after the NPRM was sort of flushed out and we changed some of the requirements, there's some kind of obvious answers. One, we fully expect that when remote ID modules or drones start to become available, we're talking about a very limited range at broadcasting. This isn't, again, something you'll be 4 or 5 miles away from a drone and hold up a phone and know, hey, there's a drone.
But it could be 5 kilometers if the Bluetooth standard is adopted, just so don't underplay it.
Flying over there. Likewise, an aircraft operating above you probably won't pick up that signal, or at least for any reasonable amount of time. The other issue that was discussed a lot in terms of aircraft being able to see all these drones with remote ID is that it would just be in the same way as saturation for ADS-B, saturation for the pilot. That's just a lot of blips on displays that they have in the flight deck that would probably take away from situational awareness.
So again, an admission that this has nothing to do with safety. This is not going to stop people flying drones near aircraft. It's not going to allow aircraft pilots to identify the operator or the owner of that drone. It's not going to do anything to solve what, if we believe the media and the FAA, is the single biggest problem, which is drones flown near aircraft. And if you look at the reports on the FAA website, there are a lot of reports from pilots. We saw a drone. It's not going to do anything at all to address that problem, because we were told that's what registration would do. By holding people accountable, registration would allow us to, and to stop people from doing bad things because they could get caught because they got the number on their drone. We were promised that if you just pay your $5 a year, it'll make the skies safer because people with drones won't be doing bad things because they could get caught. Well, hang on a minute, that didn't work. And remote ID will not work either. It is an imposition for no return. We've already seen what they promised us remote ID would do for us, and it's not going to do a damn thing for us except cost us money and restrict our options for flying even further. And now they're basically saying, yeah, well, it's not going to actually make a pilot's life any safer either. So what the hell is remote ID for, if not simply to get us used to the concept of giving up our freedoms and our privacy in preparation for this UTM, when the whole airspace gets commercialized and you will not be able to even arm your drone until you've paid your money and got a clearance from that central network remote ID UTM. That's where we're headed, folks, but only if you let them do it. This is something that the hobby has to wake up to now. This will only happen if we allow it to happen. If we sit by idly and go, oh, this is terrible, I'll have another coffee, please. No, you have to take a stand and say, we're not accepting it. You may be wanting it to happen, but without our acceptance, it's not going to happen.
So I know we're getting a little bit short here on time, so I'm going to start to wrap up. But I just want to remind everyone that this session, this live Q&A session, has been recorded. For better or for worse, Danielle. It will be also published on our FAA YouTube channel. And I think it's safe to say, Danielle, that this is something that you and I really look forward to. And we've gotten some pretty positive responses on it.
Yeah, that's why the live chat isn't available for this video after it was happened. I noticed this happened a while ago. One of the other FAA videos, they did keep the live chat replay available until they realized there were a lot of comments in there which were not as flattering as these two might make out. And also, if you go to the comments on this video, you'll find a lot of far from flattering comments here. I think we have some lies going on.
Absolutely, yeah. We're so glad to be here, and hopefully we'll come back, as you know, there's a lot of time between now and September 2023, and more questions I'm sure will come up. So hopefully we can meet again.
Absolutely. And just so everyone knows, the previous session that we did, identical.
Well, that's probably about it for this video. Now, I think Kevin and Danielle did a credible job in terms of what they were paid to do. I don't think the FAA has much credibility at all in what they're trying to, the deceits and the lies they're trying to put in front of us, the justifications, which have no grounds, no basis in fact, the lack of risk assessments, the complete and outright deceptions that are being presented as truths here, unacceptable when you're trying to encourage the respect of a community that is being disadvantaged increasingly by the day. I'm sorry, it's really, really not good enough, at least in my honest opinion. So that's about it. I thank you for watching this video, wading through it and taking the time if you did. I thank my Patreon supporters. And if you've got comments, if you've got questions, go down to the commenting question bit down here in my private parts and leave them. And don't forget to rank the video if you thought this was a really crap video, as undoubtedly many people will. Give it a thumbs down, because other people don't want to waste their time watching this if it's really as bad as you think it is. In the meantime, thank you for watching. I'll spot you later. Bye for now.
Overregulation is like a tumor. It's killing our hobby. It must be terminated. Now!